Garrett McKinley discovered an old Apache man sitting quietly by the stream that ran through his ranch. From a distance, the thin figure with silver hair and a walking stick made the old man look fragile, almost blending into nature. But in Garrett's eyes, this was not a pitiful sight, it was an intruder. This ranch was everything Garrett had. It had been built with sweat, blood, and years of exhausting labor. So the appearance of an Apache on his land immediately stirred anger and deep-rooted suspicion from the past. Childhood stories of raids, looting, and death made it impossible for Garrett to see the old man as an ordinary human being. He urged his horse forward and dismounted with heavy steps, deliberately making noise as a warning. When the old man looked up, those aged yet deep eyes made Garrett hesitate for a moment, but only for an instant. He coldly declared that this was private property and demanded that the man leave immediately. The old man, named Joseph Redhawk, calmly explained that he had only stopped to drink water, that water calls to all living beings. But to Garrett, those words meant nothing. To him, this was not just about thirst. It was a boundary between landowner and trespasser, between inherited fear and the anger flaring up in the present. Even though the old Apache man was gentle and showed no threatening behavior, Garrett McKinley could not let go of his caution. Every word Joseph Redhawk spoke was seen by Garrett through the lens of prejudice rooted over many generations. In his mind, an Apache was never just a harmless wanderer, they always carried hidden danger. Garrett bluntly repeated that this was private land, that the old man had no right to stop here even for a single minute. He pointed toward the town, where there was a public well, and ordered Joseph to leave immediately. Garrett's voice carried not only irritation, but also fear hidden beneath his hard exterior. Joseph did not argue. He leaned on his walking stick and slowly stood up, his movements shaky with old age. That frailty briefly made Garrett hesitate. Part of him knew he should help, but the other part, stronger and louder, reminded him of his father's warning. One act of kindness was all it took for endless trouble to follow. Garrett crossed his arms and watched, urging the old man to leave quickly. To him, this was no longer a matter of compassion, but a rule for survival. Keep distance, make no concessions, and never let emotions open the door to danger. At that moment, Garrett believed he was doing the right thing, even though deep inside, a sense of unease had already begun to grow. Joseph Redhawk had only taken a few steps when the accident happened. His walking stick caught on an exposed tree root, and his aged body lost its balance. In a brief moment, Joseph crashed hard onto the ground, the dry sound of impact echoing through the quiet space by the stream. Garrett froze. His anger had not yet faded when it was replaced by confusion. The old man lay motionless, a thin line of blood seeping from his forehead, his breathing heavy and rapid. For a moment, Garrett feared that the man had died right there on his land. He shouted out, but received only a weak response. Joseph opened his eyes in a dazed state, tried to sit up, then immediately grimaced in pain, clutching his ribs. It was clear that the fall had caused injuries more serious than they first appeared. Garrett stepped back, his thoughts spinning. Leaving the old man there meant allowing a human being to slowly die before his eyes, but helping him would bring countless consequences he was afraid to face. On this isolated land, there were no witnesses, no one to confirm that this was only an accident. For the first time, Garrett realized he was standing at a fragile boundary, between clinging to prejudice to protect himself or stepping past fear to do what was right. And that very moment of hesitation opened the door to a chain of events he would no longer be able to control. While Garrett was still struggling between panic and hesitation, Joseph Redhawk gasped for breath. His voice was weak, but clear enough to say a sentence that made Garrett's blood feel like it froze. The old man said that his son would come looking for him if he did not return. Not just any son, but Thomas Redhawk, the leader of the Apache. That name fell like a hammer. Garrett had heard far too much about Thomas Redhawk, a cold but fair leader, a man who could restrain a war or ignite one. If Thomas found his father badly injured on a white man's land, any explanation would become meaningless. The truth could be swallowed by hatred and misunderstanding. Garrett looked down at the old man lying against the tree and, for the first time, clearly understood how serious the situation was. This was no longer a case of trespassing, and not just an accident. It was a spark that could burn down his entire ranch, perhaps even the whole region. Joseph looked straight at Garrett, without any threat, only stating the truth. When the sun sank low and he had not returned, Thomas would come, and he would not come alone. In that moment, Garrett realized that his fate was now tightly bound to the decision he was about to make. If you were Garrett, what would you do? Leave the old man to protect yourself? Or risk everything to save one person who might bring an even greater storm? Leave your choice in the comments below. Garrett's next decision will change everything. The first sound that reached them was not voices, but the heavy, rhythmic pounding of horse hooves coming from afar. Garrett spun toward the horizon, his heart pounding. Columns of dust began to rise along the skyline, an unmistakable sign of a group moving fast. Within minutes, Apache warriors appeared on the ridge, riding in a tight formation, their silence frightening. At the front was a man whose presence stood apart from the rest. Garrett did not need an introduction. It was Thomas Redhawk. Instinct for survival made Garrett tighten his grip on his gun. In front of him were skilled warriors. Behind him lay the injured old man. One wrong move could turn tension into a massacre. As Garrett unconsciously raised the barrel of his gun, Joseph's wrinkled hand suddenly clutched his wrist. "Don't," the old man whispered. "If you point a gun at my son, there will be no words left that can save you." The riders slowed, then came to a full stop. Thomas Redhawk dismounted with a calm that felt cold. His eyes went first to his father beneath the tree, then to Garrett, not with explosive anger, but with a fury so tightly controlled it was terrifying. In that air stretched tight as a drawn wire, Garrett understood that from this moment on, every action he took would be judged not only by guns and bullets, but by honor and by the truth. Thomas Redhawk did not order an attack. He stood still, observing the scene before him with a calm that made Garrett even more uneasy. The Apache leader's eyes passed over the gun in Garrett's hand, then settled on his injured father leaning against the tree. One wrong gesture would be enough to push everything out of control, but Thomas chose to listen before judging. At his request, Garrett told the entire story from the moment he discovered Joseph by the stream, the tense argument, to the accidental fall. Thomas did not interrupt and showed no emotion. He simply listened, as if weighing every word carefully. When Garrett finished, Joseph spoke in Apache, his voice weak but firm. He explained that Garrett had brought him water, moved him into the shade, and had no intention of harming him. The testimony of the old father clearly changed the atmosphere. The Apache warriors remained cautious, but the readiness to fight in their eyes softened. Thomas thought in silence for a long moment, then made his decision. Joseph was too weak to travel safely and needed time to recover. He would stay at this ranch. 2 Apache warriors would be assigned to remain, care for his father, and at the same time help Garrett with daily work. The decision stunned Garrett. He understood that this was not a punishment, but a test. From that moment on, old prejudices no longer mattered, only honor, responsibility, and the choices human beings make when facing one another. Before the tension had time to ease, Joseph Redhawk's condition suddenly worsened. His breathing became heavy and uneven, his face turning pale and gray even as he lay in the cool shade. Pain in his ribs left him unable to move, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Thomas immediately realized this was no longer a simple injury without white man's medicine. His father might not survive the night. Those words left Garrett with no way out. If Joseph died on his land, no explanation would matter. But bringing a doctor to treat an Apache was almost impossible. Garrett knew well that the only doctor in the area, Morrison, openly refused to treat native people. Thomas looked straight at Garrett. He did not raise his voice, but every word cut like a blade. If his father died here, the responsibility would not end with the fate of one old man. It would become a blood debt. After a heavy moment, Garrett made a decision that surprised even himself. He turned and hurried toward his horse, offering no explanation, no defense. Garrett would go to town himself and force Dr. Morrison to come here by any means necessary. Thomas sent a young warrior to go with him, to watch and to ensure the truth was not twisted. As Garrett urged his horse into a gallop, he understood clearly. This was no longer an act driven by fear, but a race against time where being even one step too slow could cause both his life and his future to collapse. Dr. Morrison was finally forced to come to the ranch. The examination took place in a tense atmosphere, with Apache warriors watching his every movement. After a careful check, Morrison concluded that Joseph Red Hawk had broken ribs, one of which had injured his lung, along with internal bleeding. The only good news was that the injuries were not fatal. If Joseph rested and received careful care, he would survive. That confirmation felt like a heavy weight lifted from Garrett's chest. For the first time since everything began, he realized he could breathe normally again. Thomas Red Hawk also could not hide his relief, though he quickly regained the calm composure of a leader. Joseph remained at the ranch to recover for many weeks. The two Apache warriors stayed not only to care for him, but also quietly joined in the daily work of the ranch. At first, Garrett kept his distance, always wary of their presence. But as the days passed, suspicion was slowly worn down by actions. They worked hard and understood livestock, weather, and the land better than Garrett had ever expected. There were no conflicts, no demands, only silent cooperation. Through shared meals and long days of work under the sun, Garrett began to see the people behind the name Apache. No one spoke it aloud, but something had changed. Joseph's life was saved not only by medicine, but also by the formation of a new bond, a bond of trust, fragile yet real, between people who had once seen each other as enemies. When Joseph Red Hawk was strong enough to sit by the fire each evening, old stories began to be told. One quiet sunset, the old man unexpectedly mentioned Garrett's grandfather. Hearing that name stunned Garrett. Joseph said he still remembered that white man clearly not as a landowner, but as a person who placed compassion above fear. Joseph spoke of a harsh drought many decades earlier, when the stream dried up and the Apache tribe was pushed to the edge of survival. At that time, it was Garrett's grandfather who allowed them to use the water on his land, asking for nothing in return and never questioning who they were. He said only one simple thing: water belongs to all living beings. Those words echoed like a voice from the past, matching almost exactly the first words Joseph had spoken by the stream when he met Garrett. Only then did Garrett understand that Joseph's presence was not a coincidence. It was a return, a gesture of gratitude to a piece of land that had once witnessed rare kindness between two opposing worlds. Garrett fell silent. He had never heard his father mention this story. All he had grown up with was fear, suspicion, and distorted prejudice. And now he realized that hatred was not the only legacy passed down. Compassion, too, could cross time if someone was brave enough to remember it and carry it forward. When Joseph Red Hawk was almost fully recovered, Thomas Red Hawk came to the ranch with an offer no one expected. He did not speak of the past or old grudges. Instead, he looked toward the changes quietly approaching this land: the railroad, the government, and newcomers who cared only about taking and exploiting. According to Thomas, if white settlers and the Apache continued to live in division and suspicion, both sides would end up as losers. He proposed a true partnership with Garrett. Garrett's ranch could use the Apache's winter grazing lands, while the tribe would learn livestock raising and breeding techniques. More importantly, they would stand on the same side when facing the new forces that were about to arrive. Garrett understood the risks. The town would gossip, neighbors would object, and his reputation could be destroyed. But he also knew that isolation and hatred led only to decline. After everything he had been through, he could not return to the person he used to be. Garrett set one condition: both sides must be equal partners, making decisions together and respecting one another. Thomas Red Hawk extended his hand not as a leader granting favor, but as a man offering respect to an equal. That handshake closed the story not with victory or violence, but with a new beginning where strength came not from guns, but from understanding, and from choosing what is right over fear.